Hey everyone, this is Kara Crossway Brindle. Welcome back to another one of our videos. A familiar face. We have James with us again. Hi, James.
Hello, very glad to be here.
Yes, thanks for coming back. You brought something to my attention that felt really important for this population of therapists on the channel, which is about clinician retention, burnout, compensation, fair compensation. So, for all of those group practice owners out there, I hope you're watching this video because I think James has some ideas for you. Before we jump in, James, for folks who don't know you, what do you want them to know?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And thank you, Kara, again for having me here. I am a CPA with 20 years of experience, but don't hold it against me. I've spent most of my career bouncing around through every little aspect of accounting. But over the past few years, I've had the privilege of personally working with a therapist and gaining some incredible insights. I really do value the sacred space that therapists hold for their patients because I've had the chance to take part myself. But also over the past couple of years, I've been working as an advisor in private practice, helping the mental health space grow and meet the demands that are on them of the destigmatized world, at least partially destigmatized world, where people understand that therapy really can help them. So personally and professionally, I'm very much interested in helping private practice grow, and that's why we're here today. So.
Awesome. Yes. So glad that you're here. So, obviously, burnout is a part of this equation. Clinicians are feeling overworked, even more so since the pandemic started, mental health crisis. Everyone's aware of these things. So, talk to us about your ideas of what needs to happen for us to retain clinicians.
Yeah. One big thing that I've found with owners of all businesses is they really do need to get clarity on their financial picture. They got to know where they're at because and it can sort of sneak up on people. It's a little bit insidious in the sense that you've got to sort of groom it like a not groom it, but you've got to nurture it like a garden. And so always having a pathway to know where you're at, know what some of the recent decisions you made, what those impacts were, and especially in group practice, it's a little bit, it requires a very nuanced conversation, but the productivity of the clinicians in the practice is a substantial factor in it being able to remain stable. And
Mm-hmm.
the way I like to advocate to the practice owners that I work with is I like to just help them understand that it does require a nuanced conversation. Clinicians don't like being sort of, you know, battered over the head with quotas and things like that. And they're really, I think, hostile, I think, also to the good dynamic between owners and supervisors and clinicians. But at the same vein, sort of maintaining some minimums is really important. So I always tell owners I like to bring a quote to the table. William Edwards Deming is one of my real heroes. It's a great person to look up. He's considered kind of the Superman of the business world, but he's responsible for what they call the Japanese economic miracle, which is where Japan went from a country that almost had nothing going on to a country that was the third largest world economic superpower. They credit Deming, who was a United States businessman who went over there. They credit him with that transformation. But one of the things he said, he was very empathetic and he really acknowledged the way a business needs to work. And he said 85% of the time, the problem with an organization is because of the systems and not the individual. And so this is where we want to acknowledge that some essential level of productivity is critical to the success of a private practice, but maintaining that essential productivity is not solely on the charge of each individual clinician. There's all kinds of things that you have to think about. And this is a good thing because as an owner, you can work in this space and you can say, we can fine tune our referral pattern. We can fine tune our mix of private pay versus insurance. We can fine tune who gets what, assignment in terms of like diagnosis and so on and so forth. We can also fine tune, one source of burnout amongst clinicians is maybe just because of the kind of the way things have shuffled. One clinician might have recently taken on 10 patients, while there's others who might sort of have more long haul work. And so being
Mhm.
mindful of all the things that contribute, I think is a really big factor. And I know I kind of rambled there a bit, but does that sort of make sense? At least my
Yeah,
perspective. Yeah.
absolutely. I think especially as you're talking, James, I'm thinking about some research that came out, recently around productivity and client numbers. And they said once you got past 26 client hours in a week, productivity and effectiveness of the clinical work went down dramatically, right? So people watching this video right now, what I'm saying in less fancy words is that if you do more than 26 client sessions in a week, the fatigue and the fact that you're holding for all those people makes it where you're not an effective clinician for client number 27 or anyone past that. So that popped in my head as you were sharing, James, because I think sometimes quotas are like, I want you to see 20 to 25 clients a week. I want you to schedule more like 30, anticipating some are going to cancel, which of course makes sense to me. But like once we hit that 26 client hour, burnout, I think, is really a possibility because that's a lot of people to hold trauma and stress and whatever they're working on day in, day out every week. What are your thoughts hearing that number from me?
Yeah, absolutely. So as a financial advisor for private practice, we see that as just a natural kind of limitation in the system.
Mm-hmm.
And so we always talk about I like to talk about how you have to moderate for optimum productivity. And that means acknowledging the extremes that are present, and there's always got to be a bias in the direction of the safe extreme as opposed to the harmful extreme. So if you think about like a nuclear reactor, which is just the analogy that I like, they have to keep that reaction cool. They got to keep it on the cool side. And that's where they keep it in a state that it's controlled. And so the problem you'll find with a lot of owners is they'll have high achievers, and they're typically going to look to those high achievers to high achieve. And that's going to increase the risk that that high achiever may very well be experiencing symptoms of burnout. It's
Mm-hmm.
much better. I like to advocate manage the minimums. So when you think about the organization as a whole, you're going to have some individual clinicians who are sort of at those lower numbers. That's where conversations need to take place. And that's where you need to advocate sort of that Deming approach of having a conversation about that person and the clinician and what's going on with them and trying to harvest every contributing factor. And as the owner, and take the impetus there and try to see what's going on around this person and avoid what I like to call scapegoating, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
Deming would say, there's only 15% of that issue that relates to that individual person's productivity or whatever. But there could be so many things surrounding that clinician that we want to take hold of. Maybe just the front desk for some reason is not referring to them as often as they should, or maybe the diagnoses that they're referring they're not as well suited for. So there's just not that match.
Right.
But having those conversations as productively and as often as possible, we want to figure out all the contributing factors. A lot of people say get to the root cause. That's a mistake
Mm-hmm.
as well. There's never one root cause, like get to the source, get to just the contributors and try
Mm-hmm.
to outline all of those things that are going on, nurture that clinician to build up their caseload. Because another thing that Deming says, which we really like, is no one goes to work to do a bad job.
Mm-hmm.
So we have to think about those clinicians, and if they feel like they're not productive in the way they want to be productive, they're probably not feeling good about that either. So
Right.
we have to rally to that mutual cause and try to just bolster that up and manage the minimums instead of kind of rushing to those high achievers to sort of get more juice out of the fruit, so to speak.
Yeah. Yeah. As one of those high achievers, I appreciate this conversation because those high achievers aren't going to say anything until it's maybe too late in the burnout journey where they're like really gone into the hole. It's going to come out, maybe impact other places in their life outside of work. So I love the idea of leadership really being curious of what's going on with my team, what do they need, what's going to help them feel like they're getting those needs met, how do we optimize the referral piece, as you named, with like front desk to referral to diagnosis to assignment to a clinician.
Yeah.
And it really makes me think, as a former group practice owner, how it's never done. It's never like I figured it out and the team is a well-oiled machine, because there's always something to adjust. Would you say that's true?
Oh yeah, yeah. And one of the important things to note kind of in that constant adjustment mindset is it really is the entrepreneurial path. And when we talk about the entrepreneurial path and the pressures of the entrepreneurial path, one of the things we have to acknowledge as entrepreneurs and business owners is that the task of running the business and the skill set associated with it, including private practice, is different than typically the skill set required to serve the customer or the patient. And
Mm-hmm.
so this is where the owner will have to be relatively honest with themselves that there's going to be new habits that are needed, new skill sets that are needed, new challenges that they'll be facing as they run a group practice. And they're going to be very different than the challenges they faced by being a clinician or even as just being a supervisor. And so
Mm-hmm.
that's going to require that they, savvy business owners who run successful businesses are not going to fall into that scapegoating kind of whack-a-mole trap of thinking that the problem of the moment is the thing they just need to dive into. It takes, and this is why I like psychologists and therapists and social workers, because relatively scientifically minded, they work in hypotheses and abstracts and, all those other things. And they use the scientific method to figure out really what's going on and expand their skill set. So they are very aptly set for an entrepreneurial approach where they know that things are nuanced and they can't really just scapegoat the issue. And so that's kind of what I would suggest is be mindful of those skill sets I think you do have, but just sort of sitting in a different seat to sit back, be as calm as you can, and analyze all the contributing factors and bring to bear all of your resources to systematize and as I like to say, develop the immune system of the practice, which is essentially its resistance to the things that could cause it to have a negative impact on the clinicians, their burnout, profitability, their growth, all those types of things.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know that this really does start with having a clear mission and vision when recruiting new people into a practice too. So that's popping in my head as we're speaking together about it. Of there's something about being clear about expectations at the interview stage, let's say, with a possible new hire of this is what we want, this is what we need, this is how we support our team. I know that the team culture is becoming more and more important, more so than what the compensation is, even though compensation is absolutely important. They're also like, do I fit in here? Do I belong in this group practice versus the one down the street? I
Oh yeah.
imagine, to your point, some of this is just asking the right questions. So if group practice owners are listening to this, watching this video, going, okay, I hear what James is saying, but I don't know what are the questions to ask or what to pinpoint. Is that something you can help them with?
Oh, I would love to. And again, on the personal side, this stuff is very passionate. I'm very passionate about this. And so I'll share something that I think is very helpful. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Clark Fredericks.
Mm.
So Clark Fredericks is a very interesting figure in the therapy space. He was abused as a child. And as he grew older, he had lots of bouts with alcoholism and drug abuse and all these challenges. Well, his story became very, very famous when he killed his abuser at the age
Mm.
of mid 40s. Um, but he only served 3 years in prison.
Mm.
Even though he in that experience, and I'm going to bring this full circle here in a second. Um, but the main thing I kind of want to point out is there were a lot of people around Clark Fredericks, and there were a lot of people around his abuser who thought something was going on. But he didn't necessarily get the benefits of therapy and the clinical setting. And I'm wondering if I lost you there for a second.
Nope,
Can you
you're
hear me?
good. Yep.
Okay, good,
Hmm.
good. He didn't get the benefits of that clinical support. He didn't see a psychiatrist or anything like that. Well, there's a parallel here. So during all of that time, he could have had the opportunity of getting that help if maybe the stigma was less, or some people around him knew a little bit better signs are of someone who's been traumatized. Um, but there's a good parallel here. So Clark Fredericks, for a long, long time, was someone who needed the help and didn't get the help. He didn't have the resource. Through whatever combination of events in his life and the lives of the people around him, he didn't get that help. Well, this is a parallel. I find, being a layman in the clinical world,
Mm-hmm.
and in part because my brother was in a similar circumstance in a lot of ways. Um,
Mm-hmm.
when a clinician started their journey in therapy, I think there's a very important thing that is good for these owners to keep in mind, is that they started with a passion and they wanted to serve uh, in, in this way, but they did not have anyone around them to serve. And they had this hunger to meet what I like to call the faceless patient, the person
Mm-hmm.
that's out there somewhere that needs their help. And so the common ground that I like to advocate for owners is to work with their clinicians to bolster and build that passion for this faceless patient that's out there. And that's the
Mm-hmm.
person that we can all agree in the clinical setting, they're not here yet. So it's a little bit easier for us to forget that they're out there. But the way we keep them in mind is we think about the capacity, the ability for this practice to serve beyond where it's at right now. And so that would be the difference between like that 26 you're saying and the clinician that's operating, let's say, at 18 or 20.
Right.
It's not the thing to beat ourselves over the head with, but it's the thing to bolster that fire and that passion for using the capacity we have to serve.
Mm-hmm.
That's the rising tide that raises all boats. It's the rising tide that builds the financial stability of the practice. It's the
Mm-hmm.
rising tide that expands our service footprint and helps us meet the needs of those people we have not even met yet. It's also the rising tide that will increase the financial prospects, the ability for the practice to grow. It's the great, great thing out there. And I think the thing that we want to do is a long story to get to your question, but I think an owner, a very good question to ask is, tell me a little bit about how you first got started on this journey, and tell me a little bit about how you think that passion for people you've never met yet and not yet served, how do you think you can keep that and grow that? And I think
Mm-hmm.
that's a very good question to ask, because in my mind, that's the thing that's really at the edge of this for all of these group practices and the world at large. That's where they meet, when they literally meet each other, because that's what they're working to accomplish. So
That's
long
beautiful.
story, but I've thought about that a lot. And I think, when I heard of Clark Frederick's story, oh man, it got to me, because my brother
Mm-hmm.
went a long time without actually knowing what happened to him, and my family went a long time without really knowing what happened to him. And I I see this opportunity now. It's so important that these clinicians pay attention to the people they know, but that's kind of the big thing, is that they find some way to be to pay attention and to be passionate about the people they do not yet know.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so that's my thought. Is that helpful, or do you think I'm
Yeah.
totally off?
No, I mean, I love the question, which is like, what's going to keep this passion going? I mean, to even like start that, to model that as the group practice owner by just asking that question and checking back in on that question throughout their career, I feel like
Yeah,
that would really help people feel, supported in a group practice, but also help start conversations about burnout if it's happening, right? Of like, oh, the passion is kind of waning, or oh, my fire is being squashed right now. It doesn't have enough oxygen. It doesn't have breathing room. But like giving clinicians that permission to start thinking about it from the get go, I think would
yeah,
be very helpful for retention, and thus the practice grows. Right, like it's all connected. So that
yeah.
that totally tracks.
that passion to serve. I think it's important to not necessarily think of it as only a soft skill. That is the thing to nurture. That's having these conversations. How are you doing? Are you feeling? Are you feeling ready to help? Do you want to help those people you haven't met yet? And if not, there's no reason to feel shame or guilt or anything about that. It's just a very practical conversation like, okay, how do we work with this now?
Mhm.
Do we need some more time off? Do we need a break? Do we need some more supervision? What are the resources to bring into this reaction, this powerful reaction to help it be stable and help it grow? So that's
Mhm. Love that. So, James, I know you're full of wisdom and nuggets for folks that have watched the video to this point. How do people reach out to you or connect with you further if they have questions or want to do some more work?
Yeah, I appreciate that. CACadvisors.com. So we used to be Childress Accounting and Consulting. So we kept that as our like legacy with the CAC, but advisors with an O. Look us up online there. You can also find me on LinkedIn, James Childress. I think I'm the only one that looks like me with that name. But yeah, we are really are very passionate about this. A lot of my background is just driven me to help in this space, and we're very keen on data. We're very keen on not scapegoating. We're very keen on helping private practice owners succeed. So, love to
Yeah,
hear
I
from
love
anyone
that.
in your audience.
Absolutely. Well, happy to put your contact info below the video for people who are like, yep, I have questions. I need more information. We've got them thinking about some things from this video. So, James, thank you so much for being here and for your passion to serve our population of therapists. It means a lot. Thanks for being here.
My privilege. Thank you, Karen.